What is a data lake? That is a great question, especially because you've probably heard the term thrown around in the context of data engineering, perhaps in an ETL pipeline, but you're not actually sure what makes up a data lake. But don't worry, we're going to dive into that today. Now, a data lake, put simply, is a central repository full of data. It can be at any scale, and the data doesn't necessarily have to be structured. It can be unstructured, in raw formats, and so on. Data lakes are quite often built on top of object storage platforms such as AWS S3, as well as Google Cloud Storage. Think of them as the technology and data lakes as the way you use them. Now, the reason that data lakes exist is because historically, you'd have databases which were in a certain structure following a schema. Let's say you receive data and you're not necessarily ready to process it. You don't really know what to do with it. You can't put it into your database because it's not in the correct structure. It's unstructured, it's raw, it's not very helpful. Putting it into a database could be costly, expensive. So it leaves you with this sort of issue where you've got this data that you want to be able to do analysis on and analytics at some point. It's not in a correct format to be able to put into something like a database or a data warehouse, but you need somewhere to store it. Ideally cheaply, because in raw format, there's often quite a lot of data. So you want to be able to store it on the cheap, but be able to access it when you're ready. Now that's where data lakes come in, because traditional databases require structure. Data warehouses can be expensive to store raw data. One analogy I quite like was, think of a lake, like a natural lake stores natural raw water. But then when you get a bottle of water from a shop, that is your equivalent of a data warehouse. It's processed, it's packaged up, it's structured, it's in a sort of usable format. Whereas the lake, that's untreated, it could have things in it. Now I'm going to run you through a couple of demos where we can load data into a data lake and use it as part of an ETL pipeline. Now to begin with, I've got a workflow here inside of Kestra, which is going to upload data for us automatically to our storage bucket, which is acting as a data lake. Now, the thing that makes this sort of ETL, you could say, is quite often you might need to extract data from somewhere, in this case, a HTTP request, and then you want to be able to store that data somewhere so that when you're ready to do your analysis in the transformation stage, you can do that. But you need to hold on to the data once it's available. So what I can do here is I can download the data with our extract task, and then I can upload it to Google Cloud Storage into a storage bucket. And then this means that our data lake or storage bucket is then ready to be able to be used by BigQuery, our data warehouse, when we're ready. And that's the key thing. We can store this data and then run the queries on it when we need to, rather than at the stage of receiving the data, which means we save a lot of cost because we're not having to run those queries and set it up and get it structured straight away. We can do that when we're ready. Now I'm going to execute this workflow in a minute, but I've got another workflow that sort of helps to show how you can automate with a data lake. Now this workflow is using a Google Cloud Storage trigger, which means any data added to our data lake will automatically trigger this workflow. And this workflow will then load that data directly into BigQuery. This is a sort of a great scenario for ETL, for example, where data might get automatically added to your storage bucket, and then you can load it into BigQuery ready for you to run some analysis on it. Now, as you can see here, here's our data lake, which is a storage bucket using Google Cloud Storage. Now, the thing that makes this a data lake is the fact that I'm going to store things in a structured format using folders. Now, the data itself might not be structured, but I'm going to store it in a way which means that when I'm ready to access this in BigQuery, it's easy to go through. You can think of it like a catalog. I can go through it and find what I need, and then I can load it into BigQuery. My upload task in that original workflow is going to upload things to an inbox folder, and then that trigger in the next workflow is going to move it into the BigQuery folder, so we know that data has been loaded into BigQuery, and then BigQuery will keep referencing that. So this means if that workflow stops working for some reason or we pause it, data that hasn't been processed will still be in the inbox folder, so we know what's been processed and what hasn't been processed. And then in BigQuery, we've currently got no tables. Now, if you're unfamiliar with data warehouses, we did do a video very recently on those. So I'd recommend checking that out where you can learn all about those. Now, if I upload the data here, I can select which month I want to run, and it's going to pull data directly from the New York Taxis and Limousine Commission. Now, the cool thing about this is they upload new data every single month. So I could set up a trigger to automatically run at the start of each month to pull this data and then load it into our data lake, which we can then transform with a data warehouse. Now I'm going to execute this workflow for the month of October, and we're going to see it's going to upload that month to our data lake, and then it's going to list out the files inside of that particular folder in the data lake. So we can see it's uploading that file now, which is a Parquet format in its current form, not hugely useful to us, but that's where the later stages come in. And so now we can see that it has added it. If I go into here and give this a refresh, we'll see that it is in the inbox folder and we have our Parquet file. Now, if I go back to that workflow, we can see under outputs that it has in fact got the information for that. We can see it was 2025-10.parquet, so we know that's correct. Now, if we go over to the next workflow, we'll actually see that it should start running any second now. We'll see that the trigger is going to start, and we can see that it has started to execute. We can go to executions and see it's starting to load that data into BigQuery now, and we should see a new table in there just a second. And as you can see, it's added it to BigQuery. I can actually click into here and click preview, and we can see that this data is all October based, so we know it's uploaded the correct file. So this is a great example where your data lake can store your data in a sort of predefined structure where you can have all this raw data in different folders so that you can kind of work out what's ready and what's not. As you can see here, if I refresh this bucket now, that trigger should have moved the data from the inbox folder, which we can see is empty, and it's now put it into the BigQuery folder. So we can see there's actually a couple of other files in here too that have already been processed. And so this is a great example of where the data lake here has made it very easy for us to see that raw data. But here we can start running queries on it. The data is in the data lake, but we're processing it in the data warehouse. So it sort of helps us manage the costs a little bit there, because the costs of storage are being held in the data lake, but we're only running costs for being able to run queries and analytics rather than to also store the data. So it sort of gives you the best of both worlds. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an insight into data lakes and how they might differ from storage buckets on their own, and how you can use them in sort of a data engineering context. Now, if you'd love to learn more about this sort of stuff, we're actually working with Data Talks Club to help sponsor Module 2 of the Data Engineering Zoom Camp. And we're going to cover everything you need to know to build your very own ETL pipelines with Kestra as the orchestrator. So if that is something that interests you, I'll put a link in the description where you can sign up today and get started in January when we start the course. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to press subscribe. It really helps out, and make sure to like this video too.